Good morning, everybody. Starting today, this is your brand new edition of the Nigel Farage Show. I'm going to be here every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. You now get 5 days of Farage. Don't forget, I'm still here Monday to Thursday, 7 till 8 p.m, where you get to have your say on the day's top stories. This new Sunday edition will take a closer look at the stories that have been getting you talking all this week. And importantly, we'll look ahead to what's going to make the headlines in the weeks to come. And I will be extending the invitation to come on this show to politicians from all sides of the political spectrum. I want them to come on and to have a grown-up debate on the issues that matter. I'm here to demonstrate that dialogue can remain open even if you disagree with someone's point of view. And of course, I want your views. In fact, I would say this, that on Sunday mornings, across radio and across television, there are now a mass of political and current affairs programmes. But too often, it seems to me that it's journalists talking about politicians, politicians talking about journalists, politicians talking about politicians, and even journalists talking about journalists. And whilst it's important to hear the views of our leading political and media figures, too much of the debate is inside the London bubble. That's why the most important component of this show is your reaction, whether it's via a phone call, tweet, whether it's via a text, a Facebook message. Let's get your views on the day's big stories out there, loud and clear. And today from 11 o'clock, we will talk about something coming up in a few weeks, and that is the German elections. Tonight, a big TV debate between Angela Merkel and her rival Martin Schulz. But for now, well, it has to be Brexit, doesn't it? The silly season is over. Everybody's coming back. Big parliamentary debate this week on the so-called Great Repeal Bill. And just before the show, I spoke to former Europe Minister Lord Peter Hain, and I asked him, what is the current state of the Brexit negotiations?
They're a mess. I don't see what the government's negotiating position is. David Davis is an engaging fellow, but he isn't clear what he's trying to achieve unless, and this is my fear, unless we're heading for a no-deal situation in which we get to, not very far away, a position where actually the British government says we can't do a deal and therefore we're simply exiting. That would be catastrophic. That would be the hardest of landings on Brexit, and frankly, even for an arch-Brexiteer like you, I cannot see that would be a satisfactory outcome. It would be very serious for the economy, for example.
Well, it's not what any of us on the Brexit side would desire, although the argument's been made that no deal is better than a bad deal. But it seems to me that the sticking point, and what could lead to no deal, is the size of this so-called divorce bill. Now, I mean, what do you think a reasonable settlement should be?
I have no idea, because I'm not across the detail any more than you are, and what is obvious is that we have obligations, we have liabilities for pensions and a number of other programs which we entered into in good faith as a British government, and Britain does not break its word. If we ever started entering into that game in terms of international treaties and agreements, then we would be in a dire place and lose respect across the world. So I don't know what the figure should be, but it's clear that there is a cost to leaving, and that should be negotiated in good faith. And it's not clear to me whether Barnier is in the right or Davis is in the right on this, but actually that is not the key issue. The key issue for me is what kind of transitional phase and period we get so that we can have time to adjust to this monumental upheaval in our trading relationships. Around about half our trade is with the countries of the European Union, and you can't simply stop that on day one and then on day two be into some kind of placid new trading relationship. There has to be a transitional approach which allows adjustments to be made and now allows negotiations for new trading relationships to take place. And I think that has to be over a period of years, remaining in the single market and also in the customs union at a minimum.
But we didn't vote for that. I mean, I hear people saying, and I read your piece in The Guardian where you talked about the single market and your belief of how important it is to us, but surely isn't the real argument here that every single player on both the Remain and Leave camps during that referendum made it clear that if we voted for Brexit, we were voting to leave the single market?
That's not actually true. A lot of the your fellow Brexit leaders said we should stay in the single market.
Who? Who?
But
Who? I can't think. I honestly, of the leading participants, I can't think
if
of a
you
single
look
one.
at a range of people, from Daniel Hannan to Boris Johnson, you'll find at one point or another they said leaving the single, and Owen Paterson was another, leaving the single market would not be sensible. And I know for a fact, having knocked on hundreds of doors on the Remain side in the referendum, that leaving the European Union, and your very telling slogan, which definitely resonated on the doorstep about taking back control, was the prime issue. People were not getting into the detail of the single market. Margaret Thatcher took us into the single market. It has been very successful for our economy.
And she later
it was
regretted
not
doing it, didn't she? I mean, she later said she wished she hadn't.
Well, she was part of a whole historic move that was beneficial for the British economy. But that was not on the ballot paper. Leaving the European Union was, and there was a vote to achieve that, and nobody's trying to, as it were, traduce that vote. That is simply a fact we have to manage. But leaving the single market was not on the ballot paper, and why on earth would we want to do that, especially as it were, on day two, having left on day one? That would be madness, because for example, we are now exporting, and it's fantastic, British-made cars like Jaguar Land Rover and Nissan and so on into the rest of the European Union at a huge rate. Why would we suddenly want to face a situation where there were tariffs, there were barriers, there was a question whether we complied in the case of cars with hundreds of pages of regulations on standards in order that our cars can simply go across the channel and be sold in every showroom from Paris to
I think the
Berlin.
counter-argument, Peter, the counter-argument would be that we're now selling more of our motor cars outside of the European Union to the rest of the world.
And we can continue to do this. I mean, this
where
has
we
been
are
the
hindered by
fallacy.
tariffs. I mean, if we do business with a Japanese motor manufacturer selling his car into this country is subject to a 10% tariff. So
this is the fallacy of the Brexiteer position like yours. Of course, we are already selling to China and India and America and so on, and we can carry on doing that. But it would be mad to turn our back on our biggest trading partner, the other 27 countries of the European Union, as it were, on day two. We leave on day one, and on day two we're suddenly over this cliff edge into a situation where not only do we not have proper trading relationships and the same free flow that we enjoy now, which surely you should want in the interests of jobs and prosperity right across Britain, but also we are disturbing the 50-odd other trading relationships that we are part of through the European Union.
So why doesn't Monsieur Barnier, who is taking the lead for the European Union over trade, but amongst other things, recognise that the EU is selling us about £70 billion of the goods every year, more than we're selling them? Why don't the European Union just say to the UK, OK, guys, you're leaving political union, we want to carry on with a free trade agreement? Doesn't that make sense for everybody?
Well, if we get into that discussion, then so be it. But actually, that's not where the negotiations are going now. And if that was the kind of arrangement whereby we wanted equivalent terms to those which we have now in the single market and the customs union, it's not clear to me, by the way, how that would be achieved, and I haven't seen any answer from you or anybody else on that. But if it were possible to get into that territory, well then I'm happy to have a look at it. But I do not believe that is possible to achieve by March 2019, in fact earlier than that, because there has to be a process of ratification by the 27 other European parliaments and indeed about 8 other regional ones. This process is quite difficult. The time does not permit us, especially with the enormous delay since the Brexit vote last year, delay in the negotiations.
I think
that
I'd
this
agree
government
with you.
has been incompetent on that.
There you and I would be at one. It's taken a very, very long time.
So my point is, if you want to actually get a smooth landing, and that is in the interests of Remainers like me or Leavers like you, for the British economy to maintain jobs, to allow our exporters from Jaguar Land Rover to Nissan and many, many others in different fields, and services, by the way. We're an 80% services economy, so just staying in the customs union doesn't deal with that. You have to be in the single market or its exact equivalent to protect our services and the City of London and so on. Then you need a period of years in order to get all the other trading relationships agreed, not just with the rest of the European Union, the 27 countries, but also with the 50-odd countries that whose trading relationships we have are dependent on the negotiated arrangements through the European Union.
Well, these arguments...
Then that has to be negotiated and agreed, and that does not happen overnight. It takes a long time. The Canadian deal with the European Union's taken over 7 years.
Peter, these arguments,
and that's true right across the world.
These arguments have succeeded in your own Labour Party, where you and others have managed to change the official stance of the Labour Party, which is now to stay in the single market and the customs union for the transitional period. And
indeed,
Deputy Leader Tom Watson was hinting the other day that perhaps it could become permanent. Let me ask you, with the Great Repeal Bill to come before Parliament this week and on to the House of Lords, does the Labour Party now have a chance of beating the government and keeping us inside the single market for that transitional period?
I hope so, because I think it would be catastrophic for jobs and prosperity in the economy if we didn't do that. If we fell out of the single market and the customs union the day after we agreed to leave the European Union in around March 2019, then that would be catastrophic for the economy.
So you will, as a member of the House of Lords, vote against the government's position on this, despite them managing to form a majority government with that in their manifesto?
If you want to talk about the Salisbury Convention in the House of Lords, I'm happy to do it. That depends on a majority government, and there isn't a majority government. There's a coalition government in the House of Commons at the moment, a majority government getting elected on its manifesto, and that didn't happen. Theresa May failed to do that.
I think we can predict, Lord Hayne, exactly how you're going to vote when it comes to the crunch.
Well, I will vote in the country's interests, as I always do, particularly to protect jobs and prosperity, and making sure that if this Brexit process proceeds, it has to happen in an orderly way, and that there's a soft landing, and that there's a smooth transition over a number of years into a position where the British economy can be protected and jobs can be secured and indeed grow. And I will be voting against anything that is attempting to roller coast the bill through Parliament. For example, if there's a programme motion that doesn't give plenty of time in the Commons to scrutinise every part of this bill, which contains a lot of powers for ministers in it, which I think is anti-democratic, and I'm sure you'd agree, that Parliament should have the final say. If any of these tricks and devices are part of Theresa May's plan, as I fear they are, then I will be voting to try and stop that.
Well, that was former Europe Minister Lord Hayne, and thank you, Peter, for coming on the show and proving that civilised debate can take place between people who have polar opposite views. He has been successful in shifting the Labour Party to their new position of wanting to stay in the single market and the customs union for the transitional period. Is the Labour Party helping or hindering the Brexit process? If you think Peter Hayne is bang on with what he's trying to do, then call me on 0345 60 60 973. If you think Labour are deliberately slowing down the Brexit process, then text to 84850, or perhaps you think neither party are really doing the business on Brexit, in which case, using the hashtag Farage and LBC, tweet at LBC, and you can watch us on Facebook Live and comment there too. You're listening to the brand new Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show. Parliament is back this weekend. Yes, of course, Brexit is top of the political agenda. The Great Repeal Bill is going to be put before the House of Commons this week, and that is the means by which decades of laws that have come to us through membership of the European Union get incorporated into UK law. But there is, I think, a bit of a shift that's gone on in British politics. Now, David Davis today, writing in The Sun on Sunday, the Brexit secretary, says that the Labour Party are trying to delay, bog down and defeat the repeal bill. He says in the last 14 months since Britain voted to leave the EU, Labour have put forward 10 different Brexit plans in one big mess. Well, they're great words in a newspaper, but I think David Davis actually is wrong. and is behind the curve on this. I think the Labour Party have now made their minds up. No longer is it difficult to deduce how they're going to play this over the course of the coming weeks, months and indeed years. They now want us to stay part of the single market and the customs union, and you heard Peter Hain outlining the arguments why. Now this morning, speaking on the MAR programme, Shadow Brexit Secretary Keir Starmer said the following.
We've always said jobs and the economy come first. We've always said we've got to retain the benefits of the single market and the customs union. What's clear now is the clock is ticking, and we are going to need transitional arrangements. The government at one stage was pretending we wouldn't need them. That having been the case, obviously it's important that we take leadership as to what are the terms of those transitional arrangements. And what we've said is the transitional period, i.e. from March 2019 until we get to a new and final deal, will be within a customs union and within the single market. Now, there's absolute clarity about that, and it's a united Labour Party position, I'm very glad to say. It's not a U-turn, it's a development of our policy. On the question of what are the terms of the transitional arrangements, Labour has never said anything other than that we retain the benefits of the single market and the customs union. The argument that has been there is about what the final position is, but this is a development of the policy. It's an important development, and what's really important about this summer is that Labour has got to a united and a clear position. I think that is in the public interest.
I think it's pretty clear from Keir Starmer. I think it's even clearer from what we heard earlier on from Lord Peter Hain. The Labour Party want us to stay in the single market and the customs union. It is now clear. It is settled, I think, that the Labour Party are going to provide opposition to this, both in the Commons. And I thought what Peter Hain said about the House of Lords was interesting. There is something called the Salisbury Convention, which says that the unelected House of Lords does not go against the government of the day if it has had something in its manifesto and been voted for by the public. But you heard what Hain was saying. Oh, no. The Tories didn't win the election because they didn't get a majority. Therefore, we're free to fight against them on the single market. And, of course, similarly, grave warnings being issued by Damien Green and others to those on the backbenches of the Conservative Party, the Anna Soubrys, the Ken Clarks, people like this, Nicky Morgans, because, of course, their fear will be what happens if those Tories on the backbenches who are still committed to the European project join together with Labour and the SNP. Could the government get defeated? So let's listen now to David Davis, who was also on the MAR programme this morning, and specifically he was talking about that press conference we saw earlier in the week with him and Michel Barnier. Barnier, to me, looking really pretty testy.
He can take whatever line he likes on the way we conduct the negotiations. That's up to us, not up to him. But to give you an example of progress, the need to guarantee the health care for people who are currently in Europe. We did that last week. You know, we want to extend it to everybody. We want the EHIC scheme, the card scheme that you take with you when you go on holiday. We want to extend it to everybody. That, have you? But we've agreed it for people in Europe, you know, the British citizens in Spain or Italy or France or wherever. That's agreed. That's done. You know, very important, incredibly important. Social Security contributions for these people, all now agreed, you know. Other things which sound
there already, is it?
Yeah, this for people, they're the only thing they'll talk about at the moment. This is the point about the Europeans. They won't talk about the future. They'll only talk about so-called, well, divorce proceedings, if you like. Those things we've been resolving. What he's concerned about, of course, is he's not getting the answer on money. And they've set this up to try and create pressure on us on money. That's what it's about. They're trying to play time against money. That's exactly what they're doing.
So we've interviewed and we've heard from the big political players as the city season ends and we go back into Parliament, politics and, of course, Brexit. And now I think we've got to ask ourselves this question. Is the Labour Party, with its new position, helping or hindering the Brexit process? And now we do the most important bit. We go to you. And we start, my first caller on this new show is William from Eastbourne. William, good morning.
Good morning to you. Yes, I've just been listening to Peter Hain, who classifies himself as an expert on Brexit. Peter Hain, to my knowledge... Well,
he was the Europe Minister, William, wasn't he?
Yes, but has he ever been in business? Has he ever actually run a business at any point in his life?
Oh, don't be so ridiculous. Of course not.
He would have classified himself at one point as an expert on South Africa. South Africa is now in ruins. The country has been wrecked. and and Peter Hain is never asked about his part in bringing about the destruction of South Africa. As far as
William, just 1 second. I mean, I would accept that South Africa has got some very significant problems, but on the big point that Peter Hain campaigned on and became famous for, namely fighting apartheid, wasn't he right in principle on that?
He was right in principle.
Right, okay.
But subsequently, the economy of South Africa has been ruined.
Yeah, fine.
So what right has Peter Hain now to pontificate about the economy of the UK versus Europe? And and you have been absolutely right in the past. If you look at the number of German cars that are on our roads, Germans export billions of pounds worth of cars to this country. Do you think the Germans are going to sit back and allow some half-baked deal to be arranged by the EU? They will be clamouring to keep their jobs and their industry.
It's not in the interest, is it, of BMW based in Bavaria, or the champagne makers from that part of France, or the Belgian chocolate makers? It's not in their interest. And William, in a sense, what you've got here is you've got the British government negotiating, not with national governments or companies, they're negotiating with the structure of the European Union itself, and they are desperate to keep their system in place. They're desperate, I could add cynically, to keep their wonderful lifestyle in place. So
their gold-plated pensions and their tax-free incomes.
It's not tax-free, but it's top-rate tax 16%, so it's not very far away. I mean, so are the Labour Party, William, in your view, has the Labour Party now come to a position where it is a hindrance to Brexit?
I think it is, yes.
Okay, and that's a bad thing in your view?
It is.
It is.
We should be risk-takers. We should take the risk, and we should go for it.
Right. Well, William, that, I think, is the position that many Brexit voters will take. There are others, of course, who will say, well, actually, we need a long transition. This is the most important thing the United Kingdom, has done in modern times. And if it takes a few years so that we can get it right, then so be it. And that's an argument I'm hearing from many of my Tory Brexit friends who would much rather the Conservative Party were in government than the Labour Party. And I do wonder sometimes where people's loyalties lie on a subject like this. Is it about what's good for the country, or is it about what's good for the party? The real political battles on Brexit are about to begin, and the Labour Party has a very clear new position. They're going to try and keep us in the single market and the customs union, at least for the transitional period, however many years that may be. And I'm asking you, is Labour helping or hindering the Brexit process? Let me know whether you approve or disapprove on 0345 60 60 973. Now, one of the things I don't intend to do with this Sunday show is to do newspaper reviews. I know that all the other programmes tend to do them, but I very much take the view that actually newspapers are selling smaller and smaller numbers, and a lot more of us are forming our opinions and getting our news from blogs and goodness knows where else. But occasionally there are standout stories, and I do think that the political editor of the Sunday Times, Tim Shipman, has the most interesting story today, and he makes the point that he says Theresa May is set to approve a politically explosive Brexit bill of up to £50 billion after the Conservative Party conference in October in an effort to kickstart trade talks with the European Union. Now, David Davis, when asked about this, said, we're not going to pay a £50 billion divorce bill. No, Brexit Secretary Davis, I'm sure you won't, but you want us to enter into transitional arrangements for up to about a 3-year period. So if during that 3-year period we were to continue to pay in our gross amount to the European Union, well, that would get us up to nearly 40 billion sterling before we even started. And I would just say, when people say, we won't pay this bill, we won't do that, please never trust them. So I think, whichever way we cut this, by the time we do leave the European Union, it will have cost a very large sum of money. Many tens of billions. And this is not where the public want to be. Some big polling research out this week showing that over 2/3 of you do not want a Brexit bill in excess of 30 billion sterling. Back to the question, the Labour Party, are they helping or hindering the Brexit process? Chris in Richmond.
Morning, Nigel. I mean, I think they are helping the Brexit process. I'm a Liberal Democrat, and I've been frustrated at Labour's kind of what I call a calm suture position. They've had more than 69 positions, as far as I'm concerned, over the last 3 years.
Yes, I mean, David Davis agrees with that, but didn't put it in quite those terms. But surely, Chris, now, the big change this week is that the Labour Party now has a settled position.
Yeah, and I think it's great. I mean, look, at the end of the day, Nigel, I have to say most Brexiteers, including yourself, are deluding themselves if they think we can leave the European Union in 18 months' time on WTO trade. It is not just about goods and services. It's about regulatory issues. We have no regulatory equivalent of the European Medicines Agency. We don't have one for example, regulating aircraft maintenance. We don't even know if we're going to be in the Open Skies Agreement for airlines. If we leave on WTO rules in 18 months' time with no agreement, or even in 6 months' time, we are stuffed.
Chris, tell me something.
Can I finish, please?
Tell me something.
Sorry.
Chris, let me just ask you one. That's really important. I'm going to stop you there because you're kind of making some very similar points to the ones that Peter Hain was making. Chris, let me ask you, how does the rest of the world manage that isn't in the European Union? How do over 200 countries survive, make their own rules, without being governed from Brussels?
I'm not saying that can't happen, Nigel, but you can't create a system. We don't even have an immigration system now. We don't even know how the immigration system would work. We can't even decide who would come in and who would come out. We don't even know what the rules are. We need systems. You can't create an immigration system in 5 months. Ask any IT professional that. Okay, we don't even know who's going to regulate. I work for a pharma company, Nigel. Yeah. Who is going to regulate new cancer medicines in this country? If all the professionals have gone, and most of the best ones are going to go with the EMA, there is going to be no one left. But the other point I wanted to make, and it's really important...
Are you sure, Chris, about that? Now, hang on, let's just do this bit by bit, because it's quite important. And I just saw some figures that were out yesterday showing that manufacturing industry had a significant boost so far this year. Best figures for manufacturing for some years. So surely, if things are going well in many sectors in Britain, people won't leave, will they?
No, it's not about whether. It's talking about who is going to regulate these things in this country.
Right.
Who is going to regulate? No Brexiteer asked Nick Farage the question the other day, and he still can't answer. You can't answer. No Brexiteers can answer. Who is going to regulate? Which medicines come into this country, and who, for example, if we don't even have an immigration policy, how are our borders going to work?
So this is really a fault of British government more than the Brexit process, yeah?
Well, I completely agree that David Cameron was, frankly, negligent in not having a plan B. I voted for any campaign plan, but he was utterly negligent. That's probably about the only point I would agree with you. But the other point I still want to make is around the Great Repeal Bill. The Labour Party is absolutely right to say that at the moment, if this bill goes through as planned, then ministers can have a European Union law on Monday, and they can change it on Wednesday without any recourse to Parliament. And you were going on about taking back... Is that what you call taking back control, Nigel?
Oh, when I talk about sovereignty, Chris, when I said we want our country back, what I was talking about was I don't believe there's such a thing as a sovereignty of Parliament. Because all that Parliament is, it's lent that authority for an up to 5-year period by the electorate. It's the sovereignty of the people that matters, and occasionally there's a big issue like a referendum where we get to choose. Chris, I think let me just be fair, your criticisms of a total lack of planning from the government and dither and delay on these things, I would agree with. As you say, even with a fundamental question like immigration, I haven't got a clue where they're trying to take us. But let me ask you this, Chris. You approve of what the Labour Party is doing this week. Do you approve of it because you think we need more time to get Brexit right? Or are you hoping that because of a long transitional period, we might just change our minds?
Well, I would prefer to change our mind. I would have been happy to stay in the equivalent of an EFTA or an EEA. And even people like Daniel Hannan were saying there's no question in the single market. And I think the single market is fundamental to the way we trade. You cannot unpick 40 years of legislation which is in every single sector. You can pick any sector you like. We are so intricately woven with the European Union that if we suddenly leave that tomorrow with no other rules, we have to have a transition.
Well, Theresa May would argue.
I would like to stay in the European Union, but if the alternative is we pay a membership fee to stay at least in the customs union, and preferably the single market, then great as far as I'm concerned.
Do you know what, Chris? You might just get your way in some form? Because I have a feeling that 14 months on from Brexit, whilst the British public are becoming more and more firmly behind Brexit, with something like 70% now saying just get on with it, I think, Chris, Parliament is very much going in the opposite direction. Chris from Richmond, thank you, and some pretty fair criticisms there, actually, of a lack of answers from government on regulatory issues. Mohammed from Aberystwyth in Wales is my next caller. Hello.
Hi, how are you, Nigel?
I'm very well. So, Mohammed, are Labour hindering the Brexit process, or are you cheesed off with all of them?
To be fair, I'm cheesed off with all of them. Realistically, look at it this way: we're being given so many different dates now. I guarantee you, when Theresa May says 2019, we're going to leave. We're not going to leave in 2019. We're going to be there for a while, because at the end of the day, now we're just buckling down to European pressure. That's what's happening, isn't it? Now, I think the caller beforehand, he was moaning about, oh, well, what's going to happen? What's this going to happen? Who's going to regulate it? Like you said, the whole world survives without the European Union.
Absolutely.
We can survive without the European Union. We can trade with the Americans. We trade with, the Australians, New Zealand. We can trade with all these countries. But the thing is, we don't have any self-belief in our country anymore. It's not to do with the fact that, people work on nationalist basis. We don't have any nationalism in our country anymore, that we don't believe that we can get anywhere. Look at our country. We've got, 2.5 trillion GDP? We're still a power in this world, but we don't believe it. We can go and we can have trade deals with whoever we want to, but we keep on getting buckled down by the European Union, and why should we get buckled down by them?
Mohammed, I think you've made a brilliant point. It's as if our ruling classes just don't think we're good enough to run our own country, run our own regulations. And what I find amazing, Peter Hain says, I said, well, look, Peter, we sell lots of our motor cars to parts of the world that aren't in the European Union. Yeah, of course we do. That's fine. That'll continue. But so it's as if we can do business with the rest of the world without being in an economic or political union, but we couldn't do business with Europe unless we were stuck inside. I find it really extraordinary, what many would call the tyranny of the status quo. Mohammed, you sound like a fairly resolute Leave voter.
Yeah, no, I did vote Leave. I voted Leave because I saw this country. For example, my forefathers came from Pakistan and India about 50, 60 years ago, right? And in those years, in 60 years, about 2.5 million Pakistanis, Indians, and Bengalis came to this country, right? That's a 60 years period. In the European Union, we had, in 10 years, we had 3 million people. That's not sustainable. It just isn't sustainable. We can't have people coming at such a rate. And not just, when the gentleman before me is saying about, how we're going to control immigration. Well, have an Australian point system. Australia's a point system.
No, Mohammed, I would certainly agree with that. Listen, Mohammed, thank you for your call. Thank you for those observations. And I think for people like Mohammed, who are resolute Brexiteers, I've got a feeling that they're going to need to calm down and sit down a bit over the course of the next few months, because this isn't going to be easy. I get from Alan in Kentish Town by text, hi Nigel, the Labour Party may have changed its mind on Brexit, but has the Labour voter? I think not. I suspect, Alan, in the Midlands and the North, they could pay a very significant price for their new position. Peter in Lancing says to me, I do not care if it takes another 40 years to leave. We are avoiding full convergence with a clearly already hostile federal union. But others on Twitter say that Labour are putting party before country. Well, do you know something? After I'd finished that little pre-record just before the show with Peter Hain, we had a little natter, and I said, well, Peter, I can see you believe in your side of the argument as strongly as I believe in mine. And of course, he said yes. So Peter Hain thinks that it's overwhelmingly in the country's interest to stop Britain leaving the European Union and to overturn, effectively, what happened in that referendum. I don't agree, but that's his position. Jeremy Corbyn couldn't have been clearer during the election. It was in the Labour manifesto. I watched the launch. He said, we're leaving the single market. We're ending the free movement of people. He reiterated all of that a few weeks after the general election. I'm guessing a lot of people did vote Labour. A lot of former UKIP voters in the Midlands and the North and South Wales, I think, did vote Labour. They thought, well, hang on, the Labour Party have got the right position. That has all changed. It is a huge victory for people like Peter Hain, who was on the show earlier, and indeed for Keir Starmer. But the question is, by changing the Labour Party's stance to one where they want to stay in the single market and customs union for the transitional period, and perhaps for a lot longer beyond that, is that helping or hindering the Brexit process? And I wonder what Justin in Peterfield makes of that.
Well, I tell you what, good morning.
Good morning.
I think we're kind of missing a point here. It's becoming party political.
Very.
It really is pointless becoming party political. There really wasn't a mandate for getting out of the European Union. It was such a close vote.
Really?
Yeah, really. I mean, 2%. That's nothing.
So
That's
had
nothing
it been,
at all.
Justin, had the establishment won, do you think there'd be any prospects of another referendum? None.
I just wish it had never had happened. I wish that David Cameron hadn't tried to destroy the the British Union with his referendum on Scottish independence and with this referendum on getting out. The European Union is going to fall apart. It cannot continue as it is at the moment. In the same way as the Soviet Union fell apart, it gets too fat, it gets too corporate, and it would have been so much better if we'd have stayed in and actually played a constructive part in a reform of the European Union, rather than being the architect of its destruction.
Well, Justin, let me just say this to you. I have been attending the European Parliament since 1999. I can scarcely believe it. But one of the things I've seen and studied over the years is this idea that somehow the British can reform or change the European Union. You know, Mrs. Thatcher, at the absolute height of her powers in the late 1980s, at least electorally in this country, the height of her powers, went to the European Union to persuade them that they were taking political integration too far, and the Coles and the Mitterrands and the Delors completely ignored her and carried on regardless. And Tony Blair, you know, in 2005, and he just won that election. He was riding on the crest of a wave. He was the only European leader, frankly, at that stage, with any big international credibility, turned up to do the revolving presidency for 6 months, promised a whole heap of reforms and achieved nothing. So, Justin, you can't say the Brits didn't try to reform it. But where, Justin, I do agree with you completely, is that it is going to fall apart. It doesn't work. It's divided from north to south by a currency that is unsuitable for nearly all of the Mediterranean. And the migrant crisis has now split culturally Europe from east to west. But, Justin, one of the reasons I voted Brexit, Justin, unlike you, from the sounds of it, is I don't want to be on that train that is hurtling towards disaster. I don't want to be on the train, Justin, when it hits the buffers.
Okay, I grant you that, but jumping off a moving train isn't much help either.
Well, it's which was the lesser risk, isn't it?
And Margaret Thatcher, they were all had their points, and they tried to influence change. But that was before the collapse of the Greek economy, the collapsing of the Italian economy, the Spanish economy. All these things have happened and are coming to realization subsequent to them. And this is really having to concentrate people's minds. The Germans are doing fabulously well out of the European Union. How many submarines did they sell Greece?
Oh, I know, and all the military equipment, and yeah, I know.
You know, they've done fabulously well. Now, if it was the Deutschmark, they wouldn't be selling a fraction of what they're selling.
No, Justin, you're absolutely right, and we're going to be discussing after the 11 o'clock news whether it's in Britain's interest for Mrs Merkel to get re-elected or not. Justin, thank you for your points. James in Gillingham, the Labour Party are slowing down Brexit, according to David Davis. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Good morning, Nigel.
Good morning.
I don't think they're hindering Brexit. They're giving sense to where there is no sense. At the moment, the government are at sixes and sevens. We had the referendum. People voted the way they did. Mm-hmm. And if you're a Democrat, you have to accept that vote. Yeah. I didn't vote to leave. I voted to remain. Uh-huh. The government had all these months since the referendum to prepare the groundwork, to prepare their position papers. What did they do? Nothing. The EU, on the other hand, prepared their homework well. Then we get the Prime Minister. Then we trigger Article 50. Still, we haven't prepared anything. We had no position papers written out. Then we get Theresa May calling a general election because she said on the steps down the street that everybody was threatening to vote against it. The Liberals were going to clog up the works and Labour were going to vote against it in the House of Lords. So she needed that general election to give some clarity and to get a majority.
Which actually, James, she didn't need at all, did she? There was almost no prospect of her losing in the Commons or the Lords at that stage.
She did not have to call a general election. I think it was a vanity project.
Mm-hmm.
So she lost her Commons majority. We are where we are where we are. Now, I think you would agree with me that the sensible way to have done it would have been referendum, prepare your position papers, lay them before the House of Commons, get the House of Commons to vote on them, amend them or whatever, then you trigger Article 50. Then if you wanted a general election after that...
But James, we are now where we are. We are now where we are. Is it sensible for Labour to try, and let's say that what they're actually doing is that they've accepted Brexit, but they think it's going to take a few more years to get there. There are other interpretations of their position. Is it sensible to have transitional arrangements? Is it sensible to delay the whole thing for several years, or is it in effect an attempt by the political class to betray Brexit voters?
I think it's a sensible approach that Labour's taken.
Okay.
It's not saying they're not saying we are staying in the EU per se, and that we're not going to take any notice of the Brexit voters. What we're saying is we want to stay in the single market and customs union for as short as it needs to be, or for as long as it needs
and that's the bit, James, I don't trust. James, I've got to let you go. Thank you. Others want to have their say. Derek on Facebook says, the Blairites are winning in the Labour Party. It's Remain at all costs. Well, Derek, certainly the Blairites are having the better of this. And Tony in Chichester, what do you make of the Labour Party's position, and is it helpful?
Good morning, Nigel. No, it's not at all. No, why it can't be? We've had a referendum. Why they can't all stick together as one and toe the line, and then we're in a much stronger position to go to Europe and discuss, from a strong point of view.
Because, Tony, the political class basically never wanted to have this referendum. I mean, David Cameron didn't want to have this referendum. He just felt politically imperiled, so he had to. I think, Tony, from my perspective, what you're seeing now is the establishment fighting back.
But the big problem is people. Is the people in Europe don't know where they stand, and the people that come from Europe working here don't know where they stand. Why on earth, I know what they're going to say, why they can't agree on something to stop these people worrying, and probably the answer is all money comes first.
Yeah.
We won't discuss anything until we discuss money.
Tony, I have to say that when it comes to concessions, I thought the big pitch that Theresa May should have made early on is to say we are going to give absolute assurance that anyone that legally came to the United Kingdom, whatever the numbers, and people like me would argue too many came, but anyone that legally came will be fully entitled to stay. She could have boxed that argument off. She chose not to. So, Tony, do you think that because of politicians doing what they do, that this effectively, from what you're saying, is acting against our national interest?
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, people don't know where they stand.
No, OK.
Brexit or Remain, they just don't know where they stand. I would like to buy a place in France. What am I supposed to do? What can I do?
Well, you still buy it, although I'm told buying houses in France these days is much easier than selling them. Tony, thank you, and thank you to all our calls, and all I will say is that the gap between public opinion and our political class got a whole lot wider this week, and there may be trouble ahead. Now, we are just 3 weeks away from the German elections, and everything is at stake. Tonight, German Chancellor Angela Merkel and rival SPD candidate Martin Schulz will take part in a TV debate, a big TV debate. Mrs. Merkel's fourth term is what is up for grabs. I want to know from you, do you think it's in Britain's interest for Angela Merkel to stay on as Chancellor? To get involved, call me on 0345 60 60 973. You can text me at 84850. You can tweet Farage and LBC at LBC. And you can keep watching me on LBC's Facebook page now. On September the 24th, in 3 weeks' time, there are going to be the big set of German elections. Elections for their parliament, the national parliament, and, of course, the election that will sort out who the next German Chancellor is. And it's something that I don't think has been talked about very much in this country yet, but I think it perhaps will after today. Why do I say that? Because today there is going to be, or tonight, there is going to be a big head-to-head between Angela Merkel and her challenger from the Socialist Party, Martin Schulz. So it's going to be a really interesting, fascinating evening. Massive audience expected to watch it. I know both of these characters myself. Mrs. Merkel I've met several times. Clearly very competent. Somebody who many think, without her solidity, that the 2008 financial crisis could have led to perhaps a quite deep collapse in the Eurozone, and people would credit her with that. And they'll say she's been there for 12 years, leading Germany, and she's done a very good job. Others will say that whatever her record, that she ruined everything 2 years ago by saying to people coming across the Mediterranean, we can cope, Germany can cope, regardless how many of you have come. And there are now voices of criticism in Germany saying that culturally it was an inappropriate thing to do, and that in terrorist terms it has made Germany and the rest of Europe a far less safe place. As I say, I've met her, spent time with her. I wouldn't exactly describe her as being a ball of joy, a very serious-minded person, but clearly competent. And her challenger, Martin Schulz, who was President of the European Parliament for many, many years. So to get a bit of a feel for what's going on in Germany, I spoke earlier this morning to David Charter, who was the Berlin correspondent at the Times and the author of Europe In or Out. And I asked him what we can expect this evening.
This is the one and only live TV debate between Angela Merkel and her main challenger to be the Chancellor of Germany, who's called Martin Schulz. And you know Martin Schulz very well, Nigel, because you were in the European Parliament when he was the President of the European Parliament.
We do, yes.
And tried to keep order when you were speaking. And he has decided to switch to German politics and lead the centre-left Social Democratic Party and try and win against Angela Merkel, who's been in power for 12 years. But it's not going very well for Martin, and so this really is being seen as his last chance to really turn the tide against Merkel. Even though the election is 3 weeks away, he's a very long way behind in opinion polls. So we think he's going to try and throw the kitchen sink at Merkel. At least he's got to pull something out of the hat to turn the opinion polls and, well, basically make Germans switch their allegiance to him.
Now, these are two very different personalities, of course, and, you know, I know both of them, but Schulz I know particularly well. But what are the key policy differences between the two? Because I see two figures who are both very pro-European Union, integration, and both seem to support open borders and allowing large numbers of people to come in across the Mediterranean.
Well, that's right up to a point, Nigel, because both of these parties are currently in the government. The German government is a left-right coalition. So it's Schulz's party and Merkel's party. And they, of course, have been in charge through this period where over 1 million migrants were allowed into Germany over the last 2 and a bit years. So there are some huge similarities between them. And it's one reason why Schulz is struggling. What he's trying to do is to find policy differences. So, for example, he has accused Merkel of being close to President Trump because she signed up to spend 2% of GDP on defence. Mm-hmm. And there's a strong pacifist streak in German voters, which that sort of appeals to. There's also a slight anti-Americanism that he's maybe appealing to there, because Merkel is a strong Atlanticist, and she does believe in the US involvement in Europe very much. And extending that, he's also called for all US nuclear weapons to be removed from Germany, because they still have something like 12 nuclear warheads at a base in Germany. So he's tried to push those buttons. And then on the more personal side, he's tried to take a personal attack to Merkel and saying she's out of touch now. She's been governing for 12 years. She's flying around the country in military aircraft, just drops in and drops out again, doesn't really get in touch with people and doesn't really understand what the German in the streets really feel.
So it's
to present her as out of touch.
It's man of the people, Martin Schulz, is it?
Well, again, you see, this isn't really sticking. I can sense the scepticism in your question, Nigel, because he has spent 23 years in the European Parliament and hasn't actually done anything in Germany. So it's a big ask for Martin Schulz to
nonetheless,
himself as a man of the people.
Nonetheless, there are 20 million people expected to watch this on German television tonight, which is a pretty remarkable thing. And finally, David, in the end, whoever wins this will probably have to form a coalition government with somebody. What are the highlights of the other smaller parties in this campaign?
Right, so the two parties, as I've said at the moment, the two big parties are in government together, but they don't really want to do it again. So that means that if Merkel wins, she's looking at going into government with the Greens, who are quite left-wing, and they're quite pacifist, and would probably like to get rid of nuclear weapons as well. So she may have some tough dealing to do to get the Greens into a coalition. More likely is the more right-wing Liberals. They're called the Free Democrats, and they're doing very well. They were Merkel's coalition partners in the previous government, but then they bombed out of Parliament because it didn't do them any good, and they didn't win any seats in the current Parliament. But they've got a new leader, and he's regrouped the party, and it's possible that she could form a coalition with them. In fact, they want to bring Russia back into the international circuit, if you like. They feel that Merkel's been too tough on Russia with her sanctions and her policy of excluding Russia from the G8, and they think that there should be a bit more of a glasnost, if you like, with Putin. So that could be a very interesting spectacle because Merkel's fallen out with Putin, as you know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the Eurosceptic Party, how are they getting on?
Right, I think they're doing reasonably well. They're not scoring as high as they did during the massive influx of migrants in 2015, but they're called the Alternative for Deutschland, the Alternative for Germany, and they're polling at about 10%, and that feels about right because they're quite strong in the east of Germany, which is more disaffected and has more unemployment and feels a bit left out by the economic success of Germany. But not quite so well in the West. And I think about 10%. They won't go into coalition with anyone because the main parties are trying to freeze them out. But it would be the first time that a populist party to the right of Merkel's Conservatives get in to the German Parliament, so it would be a big moment. Well,
my thanks to David Charter there, the Berlin correspondent of The Times and the author of Europe In or Out, for giving us a proper objective assessment of what is going on in German politics. They've got their elections on the 24th of this month, but tonight is the big debate. And I guess, to be honest, it's being seen as the last chance for Martin Schulz. Martin Schulz, is on the left of politics. They have a further left party called Die Linke, who perhaps are more like the Corbynites in some ways. But Martin Schulz, 23 years in the European Parliament, so I've known him myself for nearly 20 years. We've engaged in the most extraordinary, furious, heated, open shouting matches between the two of us in the European Parliament. He is a fanatical European federalist. He really does think that national flags and national symbols should be replaced by European ones, and that Germany should play a strong central role in it. And you could argue with that position that really politically he and Angela Merkel, they may have slightly different views on tax, attitudes towards America, defence, but on the big European question, there really isn't a huge amount to choose between them. Schulz left the European Parliament. He turned up in Germany. He had a surge in the polls. And he did, for a moment, manage to sell this I'm the ordinary guy, I'm the man of the people thing. It didn't last very long. Right now, Merkel is comfortably ahead in the opinion polls. And I think, unless something dramatic happens tonight, and as I say, there are 20 million people expected to tune in, unless something very dramatic happens tonight, Merkel is going to be back. She's been there for 12 years already, and there are some who see the European Union now, frankly, being dominated by one figure. It is increasingly a German-dominated Europe. Why? They're the biggest country, they're the richest country, and they pay the most into the European Union, far more than Britain ever paid into it. But is it, if it carries on this trajectory, is it really in our national interest for Angela Merkel to be re-elected as we head into the Brexit negotiations. Now, on the one hand, you may say, of course it's not, because she will back up the Barnier-Juncker line of demanding large amounts of money. On the other, you might say, well, you know, this German Chancellor, she's got some big businesses that will be relying on her, perhaps to be the broker, perhaps the one person who could come between Barnier and Mr. Juncker. Have to catch him before lunch, of course. But she's the one person who could intervene, perhaps, and say, this needs to change. We need to come to a sensible compromise. And the reason would be, of course, as I've said many times before, there are a lot of German-made motor cars driving around the streets of this country. And I'm very keen, not just to hear from British callers, very keen, anyone in Germany that is listening to this that wants to call 0345 6060 973, or indeed text at 84850, or tweet at LBC using the hashtag Farage at LBC, or go to Facebook Live and make a contribution there. Be very good to get some German commentary on this too, if we can. And my first caller on the subject of is Angela Merkel in our interest if she gets re-elected is Martin from Harrogate. Martin, good morning.
Hi, good morning, Nigel.
So what do you think?
Well, I think it's not in our interests
Okay.
for Angela Merkel to get elected. No, I don't. And frankly, it needs somebody really to get between Barnier and Juncker and to sort those two gentlemen out.
Well, surely, given that Angela Merkel is the dominant political figure in European politics, and she really is. I mean, Macron, Macron, it was always the Franco-German relationship that effectively ran the European Union, but Macron is incredibly new and actually is seeing a collapse in ratings already. So, Martin, could she potentially be the figure that gets in the middle of this and leads to a sensible Brexit resolution, or is her fanaticism for the EU project going to overrule that?
Nigel, I'd like to think so, because it's not only looking at things as they are now, Nigel, it's looking at things, what it might be, say, in 10 or 20 years' time. You've got to look at the whole picture.
Of course. But so you don't really think she's going to do this? I mean, you don't really see her?
I don't think so, Nigel. No, I don't.
No.
Because she's had 12 years. And the way things are going, Nigel, I find myself, like you, banging my head against a brick wall.
Well, don't do that too often, Martin. It doesn't do you any good, honestly. I think I perhaps overdid it a few years ago, which is what led me to getting into politics from business. But, right, Martin, thank you for your call. Martin, very clear. He doesn't think that Merkel is in our interest. Roger says on Facebook, not much choice between Merkel versus Schulz. Both pro-EU, both pro-migration, both pro-globalism. Sadly, Germans don't seem to realise that voting in either of them will be disastrous for their country. Well, it may not be disastrous for their country, Roger, in the sense that, you know, they will be actually the top dogs in the European project, and they will probably enjoy, you know, continuing selling a lot of their products to other European countries. Maggie says, Merkel or Schulz, what a very poor choice for the German people. I think Germany has lost. Those two people are not acting for the goodness of the average German person. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? It almost sounds a bit like sort of Trump versus Clinton. Gosh, what a choice. People are always saying this. Every election they say, what a poor choice. My comment about these German elections, knowing both these people, is actually, this is not about personalities. That isn't the problem. The problem here is that actually on the big stuff, and in particular on Brexit, there's nothing to choose. You can't, from what I can see, you can't put a cigarette paper between them. Now, clearly, tonight, on that TV debate, Brexit is going to be one of the big questions because it's the biggest issue facing the European Union. We may get some more clarity tonight. And I really hope that all through today, BMW and all the other big German companies are lobbying both of these candidates to say, look, whatever the divorce with Britain is politically, let's make sure in trade terms we get something right here. We're discussing Mrs. Merkel's re-election prospects and whether the big TV debate tonight can upset the apple cart and propel Martin Schulz, her opponent, into the lead. It would need to be dramatic. As it is on the current course, she's going to win, and win pretty comfortably. I'm asking you, is that really in our interests or not? Now, one of the things that I've tried to do with LBC, and I've been with them now consistently since the first week of this year, here Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday nights from 7 till 8 p.m, is to encourage people from all over the world to engage with this, and they do it by going to the LBC website, they do it by going live on Facebook, and if we're discussing America and Trump, or as is with this, we're discussing Germany and we're discussing Merkel, I'd encourage international callers, texters and tweeters. And listening to us via internet radio, that's another way of doing it, is Jeff in Munich. Jeff, good morning.
Good morning again, Nigel.
Good morning.
To find in Munich, yeah? Trusted enemy, you will remember me maybe.
I do remember you from before.
Yeah?
I do.
Yes.
Well, thank you for responding to my pitch. So, how do you see the big TV debate tonight? Are there going to be any big differences that emerge?
I don't even need to watch it because, I watch German television, listen to German radio. She's going to win a landslide.
Yes.
There is no way at all that Schulz has got the slightest chance at all. And there will be a coalition, and it will possibly be with the FDP or with various other parties.
Yes.
But I don't think that the situation is going to change. But there's one other thing I would want to perhaps advise you of, if that's the correct issue.
Yep.
I think Merkel has been a sleeping giant for the last 6 or 7 months. She hasn't said very much because she knows she's up for re-election. As soon as she's elected, I think the entire Brexit debate will change. I think she will jump into the ring like Rocky, and she will start shaking things up very heavily. And the one thing I hope she will shake up are the rights of EU citizens in Britain and those over here in the European Union.
Which is your position, of course, isn't it?
That's my position.
Yes.
That's one of my top positions.
Yep.
I spent over 2,000 euros. I've applied last week for a German passport. I want to keep my own. I want to know what my status is. I would like to remain British, but, it's a bit like having Manuel Neuer play in goal for England, if you can understand. You can understand it yourself because I think you have I think your wife is German, as we spoke, and your kids, and, there are issues that you may have with nationality. I don't know. I'm not asking, because those are personal questions.
So she's going to walk it by a landslide, Jeff, and Schulz hasn't got much chance. I think, there are personality issues here. I think Schulz... It's funny, I'll tell you this, Jeff, just after Schulz had announced and he'd got the nomination, he was going to be the candidate, for the left in this election. The SPD had picked him. And he arrived in Germany, and suddenly... this sort of wave of positive publicity. Schulz, as I say, well, man of the people. And I was in the smoking room in Strasbourg with a German socialist MEP. And I said, well, your man's doing well, isn't he? He said, yeah, he will do until they find out what he's like.
Nobody notices him, Nigel, because he's not Gerhard Schröder, yeah?
No.
And he doesn't have that form of charisma and that form of whatever he had. But... as I say, nothing much is going to change, but I think that the lioness will come out of her cave.
Well, on your big point, Jeff. Okay, let's say you're right, and she has been quiet, probably though quite wounded, by so much of the criticism. With 1 million plus people coming into Germany, and now the prospect, of course, of family reunions and everything else adding to that number significantly. Let's say she comes out swinging after these elections. If she was to make citizens' rights the number one thing on her agenda, well, fine. Everyone needs some clarity on that. It needs to be sorted out. The question I'm asking, Jeff, is that the UK is engaged in a Brexit negotiation. Is she likely to be positive for that, or is she going to take the view that actually the UK should be punished?
Well, I've been over here a long time, and I've watched her develop. I've listened to her an awful lot speaking her own language, not dubbed or translated. I know she does speak English. My feeling is that, she is a pragmatist, if that's English or German, I'm not sure. And I think that she is probably the most positive leader in the European Union towards finding a a sensible solution with the United Kingdom, a negotiated solution.
Yeah.
If you look at some East European countries, the rhetoric is hard. If you look at France, it goes up and down. Well, I think you know that anyway. I mean, you've got much more experience in the European
No, Jeff, I actually think, I mean, look, I know she is committed to the European project and a huge believer in it and will never criticise it. I understand that. But Jeff, I do actually, I know that I'll get lots of callers this morning, who will leave voters saying, oh, this is terrible, we don't want Merkel. But I actually think of all the people that are currently there in the European architecture, I think she's almost the only one who might just be able to step in and say, look, let's be grown up and sensible about this. It suits all of us. Firstly, as you make clear, from the point of view of clarifying citizens' rights, but secondly and crucially, in terms of ongoing trade, which she knows is in the interest of her country. So, Jeff, like you, I think that she is going to be a hugely influential figure in this after these elections are sorted out on September the 24th. And landslide or not, I'm pretty sure she's going to win. Jeff from Munich, thank you very much indeed for that call. Well, lots and lots of opinion now coming in via social media. When we're out of the EU, who gives a damn about Germany and Merkel, says Joe in London. Joe, do you know, when we're out of the EU, we will give a damn about other European countries. We love Europe. We want to have our holidays and our trade and our cooperation and all the sensible things that good next-door neighbours should want to do. From the Brexit position, what we didn't want to be is governed by their undemocratic institutions. We'd rather do that for ourselves. Barring some disaster for Angela Merkel tonight in the big TV debate against her main rival Martin Schulz in Germany, she is going to come back again as the German Chancellor. And I'm asking whether that's really in the interests of our country as we go into the really difficult phases of the Brexit negotiations. But overnight, you will have seen that North Korea has successfully conducted a test of a nuclear bomb. Many think it was probably a hydrogen bomb. It caused earth tremors going through South Korea. And some of the estimates of what was actually tested are pretty scary. I'm not a scientist, but we're told that today's bomb would have been something around about 10 kilotons. That's the most conservative estimate. Others have said it could even be as high as 40 or 50 kilotons. We don't know. But put it into sort of context, Hiroshima was 13 kilotons, Nagasaki was 20 kilotons. So we are talking about, a controlled nuclear explosion today of a very, very huge magnitude, and there seems to be absolutely no dampening down in any way of this continued crisis that the world is facing with North Korea. And joining me to comment on this is Jim Hoare, and he was the British representative to North Korea and a specialist at the School of Oriental and African Studies in the two Koreas. Jim, good morning.
Good morning.
Does this mark yet another serious escalation, Jim?
I think one has to be a bit careful about taking everything at face value. But it is clearly further evidence that North Koreans are determined to go ahead with both a viable nuclear weapon and also the means of delivering it. The rocket tests are the latter, and the continued series of nuclear tests, although this is the first one since last year, show that these two things go in parallel. It's not unexpected, because it is been clear since their first test in 2006 that this was where they were going. But exactly how far they've got, of course, we don't really know, and that is both worrying, but also perhaps a bit reassuring that you don't necessarily have to take everything they say at face value.
No, sure. I mean, I guess the worrying thing for people, Jim, is that, when two sides have a weapon that is capable of destroying each other or even much of the world, I guess the thing is rationality kicks in and it becomes in no one's interests to use it. You are an expert on this regime. Are we dealing here with Kim with a rational person?
I think the regime hitherto has shown that while it is risk-taking, it chances its arm regularly, but it doesn't, so far, appear suicidal. And that whatever it may say it could do or might do, it doesn't do it. But the worry is that with uncertainty on both sides, with edginess on both sides, and as you say, with massive weapons power on both sides, somebody makes a mistake, somebody misjudges, and before you know where you are, the thing has escalated out of control.
Yes, now this today was apparently a hydrogen bomb, and as you say, Kim Jong-un is said to have inspected the loading of one of these into an intercontinental ballistic missile. So he's saying to the world this capability is not very far away. We've obviously seen, Jim, what President Trump has said about the US territory of Guam and any threatening of American airspace or land space. Do you, of all this talk, do you think that China is going to play a bigger role in trying to get the North Koreans to scale back this program, or have we passed that point now?
I think China's always been in a very difficult position. If it tries to put pressure on North Korea, then the North Korean reaction, as indeed the South Korean reaction to any pressure from China, is go away. We don't want you interfering. You used to interfere with our peninsula in the past, well, you shouldn't be doing it now. So the Chinese have to be careful what they say and what they do, because the most likely reaction to pressure on North Korea from China is a continuation of what the North Koreans are doing.
Yeah.
And the Chinese don't want that. They don't want nuclear weapons in the Korean Peninsula. They didn't want them when the United States had them there. They don't want them now. And what the Chinese say, and I think what I would probably say, is that you really have to accept that North Korea is there, accept it's a nuisance, a bloody nuisance if you like, but you've got to deal with it. And that's been the problem with the United States since George W. Bush threw away what Clinton had developed. And it's gone downhill ever since. There have been moments when it seemed to be better, but in the end, it's been a steady decline of contacts between North Korea and the United States, an unwillingness on the part of the United States to deal with North Korea, and yet somehow to solve the problem or to contain the problem, you need to sit down and talk with them.
Yes, and we're a long way from that right at this moment in time. With
I suspect we are.
Yeah, and I mean, Jim, and this is a very difficult question that you might not wish to answer, but if we got to the point where Trump did take some military action against North Korea, what in those circumstances does the British government do?
Bites its nails very hard, I should say.
Yes.
The thing is, people talk about, the Korean War never ended. Well, wars end in many ways, and if you have a truce that lasts from 1953 until now, you could say that the old conflict has ended. So there's no legal obligation on Britain, and hitherto we've made that quite clear, as the countries, to go back to aid South Korea if it was attacked. That said, if it was attacked, of course, I suspect people would begin to think about what they should do and how they should do it. It's probably much too early to say what any given country would do in the circumstances. The Prime Minister in Tokyo said that we would stand with the United States. The Australians have said they would stand with the United States. But I think much would depend on the circumstances of a conflict. Now, the trouble is that Mr. Trump, for all his bravado, is faced by exactly the same dilemma as his predecessors. To attack North Korea runs the risk, not, I think, at this stage of retaliation against the United States, but certainly possibility that South Korea comes under attack, and they don't need nuclear weapons for that.
No.
Indeed, that Japan does. In both places, there are a large number of American troops, their families, businessmen, all sorts of Americans.
Yeah, no, this is, as you say, this is very, very difficult to know what anyone will do in these circumstances, but clearly none of this going in the right direction. Jim, thank you so much for joining me this morning and giving us some real inside expertise and knowledge of the North Korean regime, which so few people, I think, in the world have. That was Jim Hoare, the former first British representative to North Korea. Thank you. And back to our debate. Merkel, it looks like she's on for a huge victory in these German elections, unless she trips over badly on the big TV debate tonight. Is it in our interests or not? Charlotte is in the Forest of Dean. Charlotte, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel.
Good. So what do you think?
I think she's going to win with a massive landslide, and I don't really think that politically the Germans at the moment really have a decent choice of parties, because most of them, as many others have said, they're pro-immigration, they're pro-EU, and to be honest, they're all pretty much of the same.
Yes, they really are. Policy
makeup, and I feel sorry for the Germans because they really have no choice. And the AfD, I think they've had their problems.
Yes, I mean,
they were what they were.
Just to remind people, Charlotte, and we did touch on this at the top of the hour, but it's worth going back over it. The AfD are the alternative for Deutschland. They are the Eurosceptic party in Germany, not many years old. They took a very strong position back in 2015 on the migrant crisis, the opposite position to Angela Merkel, and they're hovering on around about 10% in the opinion polls. They're much stronger in the east of Germany than they are in the west of Germany. But the significant thing, Charlotte, is that they will break into, without doubt, win seats, quite a good number of seats in the Bundestag this year, and it'll be the first time that a Eurosceptic party has broken into the German parliament. But they have had, and I know what it's like with new emerging parties, they've had splits and splits again, so it is difficult. So she's going to win. Is there any hope, Charlotte, that she might say something positive, Mrs. Merkel, Chancellor Merkel, about the United Kingdom in our renegotiation?
I don't know. I mean, she's very cagey, so I think she probably might. But to be honest with you, I really and honestly don't trust her, because at the end of the day, she's pro-EU, and as many have said, she's been very quiet recently. And I think that once this is all done and dusted, I think I think whatever's coming, I don't think that the Germans are really prepared for what she's going to do. I think she'll probably, as far as we're concerned, I think she might go hardline on Brexit, because I think she's going to side with Juncker and with Barnier, and I can't see how she can deny some payment. Although, as you say, if she's as sensible as you say she is, then she may kind of try to be a grown-up about it, whereas Juncker and Barnier aren't being particularly grown up.
Believe you me, really. There's no chance of them being grown up about it. None whatsoever. Charlotte, I thank you very much. James says to me on Facebook that Merkel would be much better than Schulz, as he is much more pro-EU and literally hates us because of his position in the EU. I don't know, James, that Schulz hates the United Kingdom and its people. He certainly hates me. You're listening to a brand new edition of the Nigel Farage Show. It looks like Angela Merkel is going to beat Martin Schulz, and she is, once again, going to beat the German Chancellor, the dominant political figure in Europe. Is that good news or bad news for Brexit Britain as we get into the crucial rounds of the negotiation? And several of you saying how relatively quiet she's been for the last few months, and how once she's won again, she will flex her muscles. We're just not quite sure exactly how. John is my next caller from Glasgow. John, could she be good news for our country, potentially?
Well, I think it's in the United Kingdom's practical interest to have Mrs. Merkel back, much as I don't agree at all and despise her politics as I do of Martin Schulz and the FDP. Germany has been suffocating in consensus politics for decades, but where Britain's at the moment, Mrs. Merkel's been at the helm for a good number of years. We want her back fairly strong because she represents very much the business lobby in Germany.
Yes.
One cannot overlook the avarice of the German industrial conglomerates and business lobby. And she'll get the deal done. The writing's on the wall. She'll take a pragmatic approach. The tectonic political plates have shifted. The Germans are where they are. They've spun a web in Europe, which they're now stuck in themselves, and they'll look to let us go on as practical and amicable a terms as they possibly can.
Well, John, I hope you're right, and I actually think that you might be right. I'm not sure. As I say, she is fanatically pro the European Union. She loathes any criticism of the European project. And I've seen that sitting with her at lunch, face to face across the table. I mean, it could have been me, John, obviously, but I have seen that, and But yes, I'm with you. I think there is an economic logic here that probably will kick in. And I think if there's any hope, I mean, when I saw Barnier together on the stage with Davis the other day, I just thought this is a waste of time. I mean, they don't even want to have a deal with us. So, John, I really do hope that you're right. How do you feel the whole Brexit process is going, John?
Well, the whole Brexit process has stumbled from pillar to post. I think that was largely to be expected. We've got Article 50 invoked. The Labour Party have taken a purely politically advantageous change of view as of last week.
Well, you say advantageous. I'm not sure. I think this could really cost them votes in the Midlands and the North and South Wales, and who knows? You know, everybody says, oh, Scotland. Everybody in Scotland thinks the EU's wonderful. Well, actually, that's far from the case, isn't it? So, you know, I don't know. But
definitely far from the case up here. I think that was shown in the last election.
Yes.
The SNP were pushed back. At the end of the day, the vast majority of people up here, certainly, they've tried to equate the fact that 62% of people in Scotland voted to remain in the European Union as somehow overriding the need to keep the United Kingdom together, and that is not the case. People up here, if it comes to the choice, the United Kingdom,
yeah, I think you're right,
come out ahead of the European Union.
Yeah, I think that particular argument is done with. John in Glasgow, thank you. Great call. Have a good day. Sean in Abbey Wood is my next caller. So, Mrs. Merkel, Sean, good news or bad news?
Bad news, most definitely.
Right, go on. Tell me why.
Well, I thought it was the European Union, a circle of stars, all equal. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So why is all of a sudden Germany running the whole roost?
All animals are equal, Sean.
Well, apparently, yeah.
Because, Sean, they're the biggest. Because they're the richest. Because she's been there.
It's a union, isn't it? It's supposed to be equal treatment of all parties. Yet she's gone in and she's basically forced Poland out, or she's saying, do it my way or go away. You're not a part of us anymore.
Well, there is an irony here, Sean, isn't there? There is an irony here that one of the major aims of the European project was to suppress German power and dominance within Europe. Now, it was meant to suppress it. It was meant to suppress it militarily.
Where they are, though, isn't it? They're going to end up, and they're pushing for an EU army. They're going to end up with the whole of Europe under German control again. And then you've got all this craziness with America pressuring Korea. To be honest, for all the nutter I think Kim Jong-un is,
yeah,
I think he has just stood there and said, "Leave me alone." That's basically what he said. Yeah, all right, you do bad things in your own country, but it's your country to do with what you will, isn't it? And America has been putting pressure constantly on them. And that's Merkel's also putting pressure on everyone, isn't it? Everyone's drawing lines, you know what I mean? And now, even like they're firing bombs across each other's countries and people are going into nuclear bunkers. It's absolutely insane, and it's like no one wants to say it. No one wants to say what's actually going on, and everyone's scared about it.
Well, Sean, you're not. Sean from Abbey Wood making it clear it's going to be a German-dominated Europe. They're going to run the whole show, including the army. And, Sean, it is difficult to disagree in many ways with that. And joining Sean, David on Twitter says, no, she wants a great big federal states of Europe with Germany running it. Total nightmare. Can't wait to get out. Brexit is a good thing. So there are many who can see she's got these big ambitions for a strong, powerful European Union, with them being the dominant figure. But my question wasn't so much today about that, and we can debate that at a future point. My question today was, for the Brexit negotiations, is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? And I still think there's a possibility that she might be the only hope we've got of getting a sensible trade deal. I wonder what Jan from Bungay in Norfolk thinks.
Hi, Nigel. I think she's probably going to be the best chance we've got.
Yeah.
I think she's, out of everybody, she's likely to be the fairest. She's done well for Germany, and that is her main... She has to look after Germany, number one. There'd be something wrong with her if she didn't. The same as she's pro-EU, but if these people were anti-EU, they wouldn't be in those governments, would they? She has to be pro-EU. It's logical.
Well, that's certainly been the political consensus over the last few decades, and yeah, I do understand what you say about sort of, you know, she will always put German interests first. I'm sure ultimately, you know, even her great love of the European project, I'm sure you're right, she will probably put German interests first. Because it's what human beings do, Jan, isn't it?
I think you have to be realistic about this. Nobody's going to give us everything we want. They'd be crazy to.
Well, no, we don't expect everything we want, but what we do ultimately need, Jan, with our renegotiation, or ideally what we need. I mean, look, if they're going to go on behaving the way that Barnier did the other day, we at some point are simply going to have to walk away and say, forget it. You know, we will go to we will go to WTO rules, but we'd all rather have a grown-up trade deal. And Jan, I'm with you. I think she represents the best chance that we've got of doing that.
Well, I think it's far better than most of the others.
Yeah, right.
Look,
Well, no, Jan, I'm going to have to let you go. Time is pressing, but thank you for that call. And you know, I think Jan from Norfolk really being a pragmatist about it, and that is the view I think ultimately that I take from our perspective. Barbara in Edinburgh is going to be my last caller on this subject. Barbara, Merkel, I think we can pretty much say now she is going to win, unless something dramatic happens. Could it be in our interest, possibly?
Possibly, yes, because I think they've been stalling and just waiting for the elections because they know she's going to win. They've been stalling in the negotiations, and I think she's very powerful. For what reason, I really can't understand it, but she seems to be very powerful, and it could be, not that I particularly like her, but I think better than Schultz for Brexit.
Well, I think, you know, Barbara, she is, you know, why is she so popular in Germany? And she still is. Despite people hugely criticising what she did over the migrant policy, she is still popular. You know, she's called Mutti, Mother. I mean, it's because she is solid, dependable, reliable, and barring that one catastrophic, in my view, catastrophic policy mistake that I think in the end will become her legacy, I'm sad to say. Amazing, isn't it? You can have an exemplary career in public life and politics and you can blow it just with one big decision. But I think despite all of that, Barbara, she has been solid, dependable and reliable. I'm just hoping that she'll listen to the voice of German business. She'll think about German jobs and she'll knock heads together with Juncker and Barnier and say, come on, let's be sensible. I can't guarantee it, Barbara, but I think there's at least more chance of that than with anybody else, don't you?
I agree, definitely.
Good. Lovely. Well, listen, thank you very, very much indeed. Yeah, well, look, I think it is a debate you're going to see a lot more of over the course of the next few weeks. The German elections will become a bigger and bigger issue, even though it looks like she's pretty much a cert to win. But that's one of the things that I will try to do with this show on a Sunday, where I've got some more time, is not just to talk about the last week or today, to try and point and look ahead at what's coming in the next few weeks. So you've been listening to the brand new Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage